Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today, a great friend of mine and the host of the Millennial Investor podcast, Joey DeGata, has put his hand up to answer some tough questions. In this episode, I'll throw some curveballs at Joey as we go over some common questions we frequently get asked from first home buyers. Hopefully, we'll cover some of the questions and thoughts that may be going through your head if you're considering buying a property, and maybe even address some of the things that you may have not been aware of yet.
If you're buying your family home, your principal place of residence, and you want that to be somewhere that you feel comfortable in, and if it's somewhere that you feel comfortable buying, then it's likely going to be a place that future generations down the track are going to want to pay a premium for. So there is nothing wrong with buying that family home around the corner from Nonna's house because she's going to, cook you a meal every second day or do your washing for you. So it's only when we differ to an investment property that we say don't necessarily buy in your backyard unless your backyard happens to be the only place where the opportunities are. So if you're looking to buy an investment property, then being borderless, be more strategic and looking at the numbers rather than I can drive past it and touch the brick.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Joey. What's going on, guys? It is Jordan de Jong here.
And this is Joey DeGata.
And we're doing a little bit of a collaboration one for the Smashed Avo and Millennial Investor podcast. Listen, Joe and I are really good mates and we often talk about certain things that are happening in the property space and different questions that we get asked all the time. And I think, there's a lot of commonality between questions that we get from first home buyers. And, Joey's just done a big streak of sort of podcasts for her first home buyers. And there's a ton of content in there. But, I remember even going back to when I first had no idea about investing in property or buying in a property. And there were so many things that I would ask about. And, I look back at them now and I think they're a little bit silly. But, if you don't know, you don't know. No question is stupid. And I think, Joey, you're in the same boat, right?
Well, you've summed it up. Like you only know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So there is no question that is too silly. And we've all asked them, even if it's been to ourselves or because we've been too afraid to ask someone else at the time. But exactly as you've said then, like looking back, there's no other way to navigate your way through other than experience, as if you've gone through it yourself or asking someone that has gone through it. So hopefully ourselves, given our experience, we can debunk some myths, answer some unspoken or spoken questions and give it a little bit of clarity around that for people potentially looking at cracking the property market.
Yeah, 100%. So Joe and I have come up with a list of 16 questions, initial questions for this podcast. We were having a little chat before and we're saying this could be a 150 episode podcast series. But for episode 1, we've only got 16 questions. I think they're just, common questions that we hear a lot. And, we're not going to go into obviously, exact critical detail of every single thing. We're going to give them more of a high level response as if, you were to call up Joey tomorrow and say, hey, I'm listening. I'm thinking about buying a property. What about this? What about that? What about that? So we'll give you a high level overview and then we'll obviously point you into some direction of more detailed content if that's what you're after as well. But I think, between Joey and I, the podcasts and the YouTube channel, we've got a big range of content out there already that will give you some more depth and we'll guide you in that direction. But I think the layout of this podcast is just going to be a sort of a role play. So I'll be the first home buyer. I'll ask Joey a couple of questions, and then after he responds to the question, we'll have a little chat about it, and any insight or thought process that I've got around it too. We'll delve into that, and then move on to the next question. So yeah, if you guys are loving this content and you have questions of yourself, don't be scared to flick us through an email. My email is hi@jordandejong.com. And Joey, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Just Joey, Joey, at estroproperty.com, ESTRO property.com.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys, either on both podcasts, no matter where you're listening from. We'd love to get some questions in and we'll continue the series going forward. But I reckon let's get started. You ready, Joey?
Sure am, mate. Let's go.
All right. Joey, we want to buy a property. Where do we start?
Again, so many avenues we could start just off the get-go. So firstly, the number one thing is finance. Are you finance ready? Why do you want to buy the property? What type of property do you want to buy? Is it an investment property or is it somewhere to live? So a couple of things there. Mainly your why, like why are we buying it? As I've just touched on, is it an investment or is it an owner occupier? And are your finances in order? Are you ready to go? Do you have a rainy day bucket there? Are you going to be overstretching yourself? So that's the first two things to really cover off on. Do you have enough money? Are you ready to go? And secondly, why are we buying? For what reason? What's our end goal with this particular purchase?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, even segregating it into two different groups of people there as well, it might be someone who's just thought about buying a property and they haven't thought about, money management or saving or putting in place, paying yourself first, or all these things that we commonly talk about getting your money management in check. And, that's the first group of really starting from scratch, starting from nothing. Okay, how do we save money? What do we need to put away every week, every month, every paycheck to be able to save enough money to have a deposit? And then, your second question is, or your first question really is how much of a deposit do I need? And that really focuses on what sort of market that you want to go into and everything else. So there's a whole avenue of things you can go through down there. And then I think the second group of people is really the people who have that deposit in place, as Joey was saying, and how much are they looking for and what sort of finance can we get from that deposit? And I think, you got to classify what group you're in. And then, obviously if you've got the deposit, you've got those money management skills, or, you've been able to save money over time, and maybe you want to fine tune those money management skills and go into that next step of the mortgage strategy or the finance, as Joey was saying. So,
and as you've just touched on there, sorry to cut you off there, but as you've just touched on there, like I suppose, the question that I get asked from, say, close friends and whatnot, it generally starts with, how much do I need? That's generally the first question that you get asked, and then I give them the same thing. Are you financially fit? Are you ready? And what are you buying for? But it always comes down to that first question being, how much do I need? And I really only get asked that question by people that are starting to save that little bit of cash. You know what I mean? Like those people with, say, $30,000 to $50,000 saved between a couple that have been working full time for, 5, 6, 7 years after university, and now they're at that point where they're going, we've got a little bit of money here now. We're continually saving. We're not spending more than what we earn. Maybe now's the time. So there's definitely a type of person that's out there, and that's what I've just touched on. They've been working for a handful of years now, and they've got anywhere between, say, $30,000 and $50,000 saved between either on their own or in a couple, and they're the ones that are asking those preliminary questions.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, mate. I think we've covered most of the thought process that goes into that real initial process. As I say, property investing or buying property is a financial game rather than a property game. So that is definitely the first thing to tick off. And we'll jump into the second question now. So, Joey, I've been with the same bank for my entire working life. I've always put my savings with them. I've got a credit card with them. I've got my car loan with them. I've done all these things over the years. I've never deviated. They've been very loyal to me. But should I go to them to get a loan? And I've got a friend who's been talking about going to see a mortgage broker. But do they cost money? Like, why would I go and see one if they're going to cost me money and I can just get a loan at a local branch?
So off the bat, the mortgage broker doesn't cost you any money. The mortgage broker's paid by whichever lender you end up signing your mortgage with. So they'll get a kickback from the lender. So they don't cost you anything. And this is something that I advise all people who are just thinking about getting into the market. Just go and speak to a mortgage broker. Go and speak to particularly an investment savvy mortgage broker, because they've got a head for property, or a property savvy mortgage broker, and just understand what your borrowing capacity is. They might tell you, go away, haven't got enough savings, or you're both working 3 hours a week and there's just not enough income there to service the loan. Or they might surprise you and say you've actually got $700,000 borrowing capacity between you and your partner, or you and your brother, or you on your own, and you've got a healthy deposit of 70 grand. Yeah, we can have a conversation. So it's a completely free conversation that can be had, as long as you've got some recommendations on a trusted broker. And absolutely, you definitely can go and speak to your branch manager at local bank, and go and speak to a home lending specialist, and you can compare the pair. That's completely fine as well, just to make sure that you are getting the best value. And ultimately, for mine, all my personal decisions are made based off numbers and not off my relationship with the local branch manager, because I mean, that's fabulous that he's a great bloke, but at the end of the day, if it's costing me $10,000 a year more to be with that bank than to go through another lender, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And just to clarify how a mortgage broker does get paid, they actually get paid after the settlement of the loan has gone through with the bank. They get paid from the bank and not from you. And so, yeah, I think, that was a big thing for me. I always wanted to go and see a local branch manager when I first started and didn't realize, people had always talked about mortgage brokers, but I always thought they would cost money. I always thought going to see an expert and getting advice would cost money, but, they get paid in a different format. And I think, as Joey said, it's a free consultation. Go and talk to them, go and see, where they can put you. If it's not going to help you straight away, as in the next 2 months, they'll help you in 3 years' time, and they'll put you on that journey to get where you need to be. And I think the only other thing that I want to talk about on this point is if you go to one specific bank and talk to a branch manager there, they're only going to be able to show you the packages that one specific bank can give you. So they're bound by their rates, they're bound by their packages with offset accounts, and they're bound by their credit card, additional credit card sort of packages that are all mixed in together. Where if you go and see a mortgage broker, they've actually got access to every single lender and every single package that every single lender has. So you might have 6 packages available at a local branch, but you might have 120 packages available at a mortgage broker, and they'll actually, find the best lender for your individual circumstance.
And that may look like potentially a better interest rate, but that's not always the case. But potentially in a lot of circumstances, more money to actually borrow. So your borrowing capacity could be $650,000 with one lender, or it might be $720,000 with another lender. And you're not going to know that unless you've got the mortgage broker who's aggregating everything that's out there for you and supplying you with the best product.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, the best way, as Joey touched on, to find an investment savvy mortgage broker is to just make sure that they're not, pushing things on you, not suggesting things to you, not trying to sell you on an individual package. A good investment savvy mortgage broker will give you a range of products and just say, hey, this is what I think. This is what's on the market. This is what we can do here and there. And then leave it in your hands and your choice. And if you want more information, or if you want a more informed decision, they'll walk you through that too. But any other tips on how to find an investment savvy mortgage broker, Joey?
Certainly recommendations, reaching out to potentially, say, buyers agents, real estate agents. They've got great networks, professionals like yourself as well, Jordan, people that have done it in the past, people who have already got those established contacts. They're going to be a great source of information. They're going to say, yep, here's 3 mortgage brokers, go and have a chat, see which one resonates with you best.
Yeah, I love it. All right, we'll go on to question 3 now. So, Joey, I know about real estate agents. My mate's become a real estate agent. He always talks to me about property, and they're very excited and ready to go and love getting those sales done. But is real estate agent the best person to go to for property advice?
They're definitely one person that you should go to for property advice, but let me be clear, they are not the be-all and end-all, and they should not be the only person that you go and speak to in terms of getting some advice about buying property. So for mine, I'd probably be having a chat to a buyer's agent or a property investment advisor if you're looking at an investment, and your broker. I'd be trusting those guys because they'd be on your team versus your real estate agent is basically your competition. He's the one that you're trying to win that battle against. They're the people that we're actually trying to defeat in the negotiation battle, I suppose. So definitely a great source of information. They're going to give you some sales history. They're going to give you the rundown of that particular property, that community, and someone that you do want to be on good terms with, but definitely not your number one source of information.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, a clarification is the real estate agent is working for someone else selling their property. They're not working for you. They're getting paid to get the best price for that property for their vendor. And the vendor is basically the person just selling their property. And I know that we're throwing out a lot of sort of not big real estate terms, but a lot of confusing real estate terms. So we'll try and delve into them a little bit more. But yeah, a real estate agent has that great history. They probably know the area really well and can talk to you about specifics. But if you're getting down to an individual property level, they're there to make a sale. They're there to get the best price they possibly can for that property. And they might be a little bit biased. I'll only go that far. But, for me, for a while, I didn't really know when I was starting out the difference between a buyer's agent and a real estate agent. I mean, my dad was a real estate agent, and I didn't even know what a buyer's agent is. And I think it's a pretty, new sort of found, not industry and not new, but, it's definitely becoming more predominant. So, I mean, Joey, what is the difference between a buyer's agent and a real estate agent?
To summarize it, the buyer's agent works on behalf of a buyer. They're paid by the buyer, and their job is to get the very best price possible for the buyer. Whereas a classic real estate agent that we see on listings when we search in real estate or domain is the seller's agent, and they act on behalf of the seller, and their price is to get the very best price possible for their vendors. So the easiest way to think about it is when you go on real estate domain, you see whoever that person is that's listed that property, they're the seller's agent, and the buyer's agent is someone that goes directly up against them in battle to basically get the best price possible for their buyer.
Yeah, and unlike the mortgage broker here, the buyer's agents actually do have a bit of a fee, so they do cost money. But I think, the best thing about finding a really good buyer's agent like Joey is, what you pay them in a fee up front or costs or commission, they should actually save you in the purchase price of the property or save you in opportunity costs down the line. So if you were to go at it on your own without, much experience and decide that, buying down the street from grandma's house is the best place to buy. You're not thinking of Australia overall. You're not thinking about all these individual different markets spread throughout Australia that you potentially could buy. Whereas if you used a buyer's agent, they'd maybe give you some more foresight or give you some more reasons why maybe that area is not as good as somewhere else in a different state. And it's okay if you're not comfortable with buying in a different state, but they may suggest somewhere else local or somewhere else in the same state that's maybe a little bit better of a purchase. And they should reduce the price of that property by the amount that it costs to pay them anyway.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's one thing that I personally like to do. And that's the first thing that I go in to do is battle for my clients to initially save them the fee of actually the buyer's agency service. That's the very first savings that we go for. And then we obviously drill down hard to get the very best price possible after that. So the initial savings and already factored into offers that we're making is the buyer's agency fee. So therefore, I'm automatically passing that savings straight on to the client. And any buyer's agent that isn't charging their client is one that you should be a little bit skeptical of, because obviously someone's got to get paid somewhere along the line. So if you're not paying your buyer's agent, then potentially a property marketer or a developer is paying them, and that may not be the best property for you, and there may be some kind of conflict of interest there. So do be wary if you are engaged in the services of a buyer's agent.
For sure. And I think, we're not, we're both pretty level-headed guys. Joey is a buyer's agent, but he's excited about property altogether, and he'd love anyone to go and, buy a property for themselves if they've got that experience and got that knowledge. I mean, me personally, being an analytical type of guy, I haven't used a buyer's agent yet, but I would if I had purchased in another state, because I don't know another state. But I haven't used one yet because I feel confident in my ability. And I think, going forward, and the way to think about it is, if you were a mechanic, would you go and fix your car? Well, not really, because you don't really know all the things that you need to do in your car. You can go and do the research to figure out what you need in your car, but then you need to go and invest in all the tools and buy all the equipment and hoist the car up and fix the engine or whatever needs to be done in the car. But if you think of that in terms of a buyer's agent, they're buying properties every week, every day. They're buying properties constantly. They know the game. They know the markets. They know where it's good to buy. They know the performance of what things have done. They've got the tools, the online tools, access to platforms that give you this data and information to help you make that best investment decision that you can. So in terms of either using a buyer's agent or not using a buyer's agent, I mean, would you take a car to your best mate who's an apprentice mechanic, or would you take it to someone who has been a mechanic for years and knows what they're doing? And I guess that's an odd way to put it, but some way to think about it.
Yeah, definitely a great analogy. Great analogy.
So, Joey, I've had a lot of friends buy their first property, and they're all talking about different grants and deposit schemes and all that sort of stuff. I mean, what grants can we apply for?
So let's assume that we're a first home buyer and we're buying our very first property, and the massive assumption is we are buying that property to live in, and it's not an investment property. Then we're eligible for two major pieces of concession, I suppose, and one of them being the stamp duty concession, which is available across both of our states where we do work, Jordan, in New South Wales and in Victoria. So in New South Wales, for purchases up to $650,000, your stamp duty will be nil, provided, again, that you move into that property. And you'll get concessions all the way up to a purchase price of $800,000. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, I believe in Victoria, it's free up to $600,000. And then there'll be no concession over $750,000.
Yeah, that's it.
And that coupled with and what's been taken full advantage of the early part of this year, particularly in January and February, as soon as this was announced, the first home loan deposit scheme, where you can put down as little as 5% deposit and not pay any lender's mortgage insurance, which can be anywhere between $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, depending on the amount of deposit that you put down. So you can get into a property worth $500,000 for as little as $25,000, and that's your 5% deposit. Where, I mean, only last year or the year before, some lenders were asking for 20% deposit, which is a hell of a lot harder to save for.
Yeah, 100%. And there's many different ways of being able to get into the market than, having to try and save a big 20% deposit. There are grants, there are concessions, there are the first home loan deposit scheme. And, Joey and I have both got a lot of content to go into further detail of that. I mean, obviously we can't cover every state off the top of our heads, which we are doing this podcast on. We haven't written anything. We've got the questions written down, but we haven't got any answers written down. So if you want to learn more about your specific state or what individual states have access to, Joey has got a podcast on it, I believe, Joey.
I do. So you can jump on and listen to that. It's called how much do I need to buy a property in my state, or something along that lines. Again, this isn't pre-recorded or anything like that, so I don't even have the podcast details off the top of my head, but there is one already announced there. I've done it for most of the capital cities across Australia.
Yeah. And I've got a first home loan deposit scheme video on YouTube as well. So if you just type Jordan de Jong into YouTube, I'll pop up there somewhere, and you should be able to hunt down the video on the list of videos there. So if you want to find out more detail, there's two really great sources. So Joey, I'm with my partner currently, and we've been together for 2 or 3 years, and she's got a stronger deposit than me. She's got $20,000 and I've only got $13,000. And we're not thinking about marriage or anything like that. We're not thinking about kids or anything like that. We've just been together for a little while, but we're, obviously we've got a better borrowing capacity if we purchase together. But do you think we should buy in one person's name or together as a partnership?
Firstly, definitely a very personal question. So you obviously have to be very comfortable in your own arrangements, and it's nothing that you should be jumping into, because obviously if things were to turn south immediately, then you might be forced to sell, or you might be forced to hold on to a property with someone that you don't really want to have much to do with for much longer. So for me personally, I always advise that property is definitely not a quick in-out game. It's a 5, 10, 15, hopefully forever year journey. So we're not making any rash decisions. So please make sure that it is something that you are comfortable with. But obviously, it means that you're going to be able to get yourself from that 1-bedroom apartment into a 2, 3-bedder, maybe even a house if you do jump in with someone else. And obviously, as you said there, your borrowing power goes up, your commitment goes down because you're sharing that load with someone else as well. Your deposits obviously increased as well. So there are some phenomenal upsides, but you obviously do need to tread very cautiously when buying, particularly with a romantic partner rather than, say, your brother. And I'm not to say that family commitments can't fall down, or even a friend. So every partnership obviously has its upside in that you're going to be able to get into hopefully a more premium property because you've got more money to spend. And obviously your commitments are halved or even gone down by as much as 75% if you're buying with 3 other people. So it does have its upsides, but the clear downside is anytime that relationship, whatever the relationship is, breaks down.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Joey really touched on a couple of good points there, but from a going back to the beginning of a very personal decision, have the discussion with your partner. It's very easy. I know, I've had conversations with plenty of people who have gone through this thought process, and, obviously it's just one partner who is more driven to purchase the property, and, obviously, as Joey said, can get into a better property if they, do it together, but then they're concerned about what happens down the line. And obviously, it's a question that goes through everyone's mind. It's not a nice conversation. It's a bit of an awkward conversation, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. And, there's plenty of things. I mean, we're both not legal practitioners, so go and talk to, a legal practitioner and probably an accountant to see, the tax and all that sort of side of things as well. But just have that initial discussion. I mean, there's plenty of avenues that you can go down. You can, buy something in a trust account, and I'm not saying that you should buy it in a trust account, but there are avenues you can go down where you can segregate out your proportion that you've put towards the property, and keep it in that sort of format. And as Joey said, we're not buying property to hold on for 3 years and then to sell it and buy another one. It's a long term. It's a 10-year hold minimum. It's a 60-year hold maximum, or not maximum, but 60-year hold.
Ideally,
perspective.
yep.
Yeah, that you need to be looking at it. So it's not if you are not married and you're only together, but you're both in the strong-willed and mindset to go and buy a property, definitely can be done, but just make sure that you're structured to get through 60 years of holding on to that asset class. So, Joey, given we did end up deciding to buy together, what does that mean to our grants? And even if we did get married down the track?
So I'll give you a real world example with that. So for myself and my now fiance, we recently bought our principal place of residence together. Now, I had owned property before that, so I was definitely not a first home buyer, but my fiance, she was. It was her very first piece of Australian property that she was buying into. So we bought together 50% each, and she was entitled to her 50% complete stamp duty concession. So say the stamp duty was 20 grand, we only had to pay 10 together, and that was my full 50%. Her full 50% was completely waived because she was a first home buyer. So I suppose that example would pretty much answer that question. You are still entitled to grants even though you're buying together. Obviously, if you're both first home buyers, then you're entitled to the full stamp duty concession. But given the example just then that I just touched on, my fiance was entitled to 50%. Her 50% completely waived the stamp duty.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it comes down to that personal situation again. These are very in-depth and circumstance-driven questions. So if you do have a question, we can delve into that pretty further if you want to get in touch with either of us. We were having a barbecue the other day at my uncle's place, and he said that the property market is about to go down 30% due to the coronavirus. And, you may be listening to this in a couple of years' time and the coronavirus may be past, but let's just presume a big event had just occurred. And what do you think we should do, Joey, because of this?
So for mine, historically looking back, there's always been ebbs and flows. There's always been spikes and peaks and troughs, and there's always been ups and downs. So as you've just said there, for us, being our age bracket, we're looking at 60 years in this game. So I heard a wonderful acronym, a wonderful phrase, not only last week. You only hurt yourself falling off. You only hurt yourself on a roller coaster if you're jumping off in the middle of the ride. So if you stay the course and you go the duration, you won't hurt yourself. You'll be fine at the other side. So, I mean, for mine personally, I look back at historically what this industry has done and what Australian residential property has done. And I'm looking back from when my parents first bought property in the 80s compared to where that property is today. And then I've got every assurance in the world that we'll be completely fine on the other side, even if the property market did dip by 30% due to this coronavirus. I mean, we're already seeing some drops of anywhere between, say, 5, 10, 15%. And it doesn't faze me one bit because I'm not looking to sell the property. I'm looking to hold them for the long term. And as I said, historically over time, the property market's just going to keep increasing in value as it's a finite resource. Our population is pretty young now. It's only going to increase over time. And that supply will forever be restricted because we're confined, particularly in New South Wales, in Sydney, we're confined by some rivers and some mountains. So we've got a pretty tight geographical pocket, and the number of people is only going to be increasing. So another phrase, God ain't building any more land. But the number of people are going to keep on increasing.
Yeah, I love that. And, talking about sort of forecasters and predictions, I mean, no one's got a crystal ball. No one really knows what's going to happen. I mean, if you asked all the economists in January, February this year, what's going to happen to the property market, I can guarantee you majority of them would have said that it's going to go up. And so, how can anyone sort of predict these major occurrences, these major events that are going to happen and how they're going to impact the property market? And as Joey just said, if we take a 30-year view of this thing, and that's pretty much, as far back as I've gone, but, it's consistently grown over those years. And as it says, as Joey says, it's got even flows. It goes ups and downs, big impacts like the GFC and all that sort of stuff does happen and does impact the market. But there is one common trend over a long period, and that's continuously to go up. And, it all sort of, relates to inflation and wage growth and all of these other economic indicators. It's not just about, one property market. It's us as an economy and how we roll and how we transact. And, we're already starting to see a couple of green shoots and a couple of positivities about coming out of the coronavirus and, the government, sort of shining some light on the end of the railway, as he's just said. So, it's not, it's easy to see doom and gloom and think, the worst, but we do get through these things. We do get through these situations, and we generally come out better on the other side. And the other part of this question that I really want to tackle is the uncle at the barbecue. And that's a really big common thing for younger or first-time investors to sort of get their ideas or information from. And, it's all well and good, like your family or your friends that are giving you investment advice or their opinion on certain things, they're just trying to do the best by you from their knowledge base. But as we were saying before about a buyer's agent, why would you not go to a mechanic to get your car fixed? And I think, that sort of applies to the property space as well. Why would you not go to a professional property advisor or a buyer's agent or someone who has knowledge and experience in that space to get your advice from, rather than, someone who has your best interest at heart, but might not have the best information available on hand?
Agreed, mate. You've touched on it perfectly. Like, they're not coming from a malicious standpoint. They're not trying to do you any wrong. It's generally from a place of love and care. But why would you not go to someone who lives and breathes this stuff on a daily basis?
Yeah, spot on. So, Joey, I mean, we could, we've worked pretty hard over the last couple of years. We've saved this big deposit amount, and we've always dreamed about going on an overseas holiday. I mean, we could have gone to Europe instead with this deposit. What are your thoughts about that?
So, look, again, it's horses for courses. If that's really what you want to do, and if that's what's going to bring you true value, no one's going to stop you. You have to get that out of your system, go and do it. But you do have to understand that that's going to come at some cost, and that cost is opportunity cost of what you've missed out on in that interim period. Let's say, for example, you decided that you would take that trip when the market was at a low, and there might be some opportunities to pick up some pretty good properties at some very good prices, but you decide to go overseas instead. And when you come back, you're going to start saving, and then you end up buying at a peak for a property purchase price between, say, $600,000 and $700,000. Between that low and that high, that gap might be $100,000. So you might be having to pay an additional $100,000 for the exact same property because your plans were set back because you went on that overseas trip. Again, if that's what floats your boat and that's what you need to do at that particular stage of your life, 100% go and do it, because you'll potentially hate the fact that you didn't go and do it. But if you are a fan of delayed gratification and you can put aside some plans for the short term and you're happy to just stay a minimalist for a little while and get that property under your belt, particularly buying a great property at a great price, then I think you'll be very thankful you didn't take that trip, as there'll be that opportunity in 2 or 3 years' time. Europe isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, as Joey touched on right back at question one, is it comes down to your goals. Like, what do you want in your life? Do you want to go away 3 months of every year? And if that's what you want to do in your life, by all means, go and do it. I mean, obviously, listening to a property podcast, you've probably got property on your mind, but, don't rule that stuff out. It's, we've all implemented delayed gratification and saved some money and gone through some hardships to get ourselves ahead in the future. But, I think to give a real life example, and Joey shared one of his stories, so I'll share one of mine, is we purchased our first property before we got married. And the whole plan with that was, we could either go on a really lavish honeymoon after the wedding and go to Europe for 3 months or whatever and just take a good break, which we did deserve and was discussed on the tables. But we bought the property first, and the intention was to use the growth or the equity in that property and leverage into the next property from that, whilst on the side we were saving additional money to go away on holiday. So I think 2 years ago now, our property had grown significantly. So we used the equity, or we were leaving the equity to continuously grow, but we had saved a substantial sum that we could have used for another deposit on another house. But instead we decided to go to Europe and to go to America and go and experience the world. And so, instead of having to try and save for that second deposit on a second property, if investing in property is the journey that you want to go down and you want to get multiple properties, we used the equity in the first one as a deposit for the second one, and we used our savings to go on a Europe holiday. So there's so many different types of things or plays that you can have out on this scenario, and I think it's just about setting your goals initially and then forecasting your future ahead and trying to line up all your ducks along the way. So Joey, we're not looking to buy an investment property. We're looking to buy a family home. And I know you two blokes have just been banging on about, not buying a house around the corner from Nonna's house, but, we want to be close to family. But we're not buying an investment property. So why can't we buy a place around the corner from mum and dad's?
Well, look, as I said, if you're buying your family home, your principal place of residence, and you want that to be somewhere that you feel comfortable in, and if it's somewhere that you feel comfortable buying, then it's likely going to be a place that future generations down the track are going to want to pay a premium for. So there is nothing wrong with buying that family home around the corner from Nonna's house because she's going to, cook you a meal every second day or do your washing for you. So it's only when we differ to an investment property that we say don't necessarily buy in your backyard unless your backyard happens to be the only place where the opportunities are. So if you're looking to buy an investment property, then being borderless, being more strategic and looking at the numbers rather than I can drive past it and touch the brick, even though I don't step foot on the inside because my tenants are living there. But if we're talking about a family home and it's somewhere that you want to be staying in, then yeah, absolutely. If it's around the corner from your mum and dad, then it's obviously a desirable area if you really have that passion to live there. Again, I say that future generations are going to want to pay that premium price to live in that particular suburb later down the track.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I just want to emphasize too that, this is probably or will be one of the biggest financial decisions you'll make in your life. So although it is a family home and although you're totally entitled to stay around the corner from mum and dad's or nonna and nunna's, as Joey said, because you want to be in that tight-knit community, maybe it is worth just having a look at a 10-minute drive away, a 15-minute drive away and seeing what is available in the vicinity and just, maybe understanding the difference between one area compared to another. I mean, I've heard of areas that are, I've got an area, 5-10 kilometers away from me that hasn't seen any growth over 10 years. But the area that I've bought my first investment property in has seen, 30-40% growth in 3 or 4 years. So, even these little pockets of areas and there's terms called gentrification and all this sort of stuff that we'll get into later on. But, essentially it means, younger people are moving in, there's cafes and restaurants and all that sort of stuff, which ultimately over time increases the value of that property. And all of these markets perform differently. And I think, it really banging back to it, we're not looking at the 3 or 4 years. This is a long-term sit and hold. But, that first property allows you to get into the second and the second allows you to get into the third. So you may be able to fast track that investment process if that's what you're after. And, if you think about things in a long term and a long scheme of things, and you're not too scared about being, 10 to 15 minutes drive away from your family, then maybe just see what other options are out there.
And you've nailed it in that even if a lot of people think that I'm buying in my pocket, I'm buying in my backyard, my grandmother lives around the corner, I know it, then I still think it's a worthwhile conversation having with a professional that can go, yeah, well, if we actually, as you've said, go 2 suburbs over, we could be buying 50 grand less than what we're buying for here for pretty much the same property. And it's going to perform it's going to far outstrip the suburb that you're looking to buy in. And particularly being that very first property you've touched on there, if $50,000 difference in potential gain down the track is going to be far more beneficial than you living 5 minutes closer to your grandmother's house. So 100% definitely go and get some advice. And you don't have to take that advice as well, but it is something definitely worthwhile weighing up while making such a big investment.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, Joey. I think you're spot on, mate, and you've touched some really good points. But what about rent vesting? I mean, all of my friends have started talking about this rent vesting thing. It seems like it's almost come up out of nowhere and it's this big term, but I'm not really sure what it is. Could you explain it to us a little bit more?
Yeah, so rent vesting in summary is renting where you want to live, so living where you want to live, but you rent that property, and buying where it makes financial sense or buying within your own financial means. So let's take Sydney and you can maybe give an example in Melbourne there, but I'll take Sydney here, where potentially buying the house across the road costs you $1.5 million, but to live in that property costs you $700 a week. You rent that property, and the difference between that mortgage and the rent, something like $800 a week. With that additional $800, you'd take that and put it towards an investment property, and that might be a house in just 5 kilometers south of Brisbane CBD. So you're living where you want to live, but it doesn't really make much financial sense, or you can't afford to make that $1.5 million purchase of that house across the road. So you'll rent it instead, and then you'll take the difference in what that mortgage would have cost you, or whatever you can comfortably afford, and make an investment property purchase elsewhere. And generally, it's not going to be in your own backyard. It's going to be somewhere abroad.
Yeah, 100%. And to clarify, there's something called the rental yield, which is essentially how much rental income you get, or how much the rent costs compared to the property value. And the higher end properties generally have a lower rental yield, which means they're earning less income compared to the price of the property. So, if you needed to be close to a CBD to work, but, you didn't want to live in a 1-bedroom apartment, you wanted to live somewhere quite nice, maybe 5-10 kilometers out of the CBD, but you couldn't afford to buy there, then, you could rent that place out on a lower rental yield. So it would cost you less to rent than it would to have a mortgage on it. And as Joey said, invest somewhere different like Brisbane, that would cost you less to get in. And I think, obviously it comes down to your individual circumstances and the 2 areas that you're thinking about living and investing in. And, I know Joey's done a really good podcast on that too, going over how the whole process works and some different scenarios around if you should rent vest or if he thinks it's a good option in different scenarios. And I've done one on YouTube too. So if you're looking for more information or detail about those types of rent vesting strategies, then check out those 2 sources.
Yeah. So and Jordan, sorry to cut you off there again. It really depends on where you're living as well. So in my podcast, I know that I touch on Brisbane, for example, where the yield is that high that it would almost make financial sense for you to buy that property rather than renting it. So your outlay on a mortgage is going to be pretty much the same as it would as if you were going to rent that property. So in that situation, I'll be buying that property. So rent vesting, in summary, isn't for everyone. But if we're talking Sydney Metro, Melbourne Metro, then it's definitely a viable strategy you could look into, as long as you invest that difference.
Yeah, and I think another great point that you touched on in your podcast, Joey, is someone like Chris Gray, who has a portfolio of around $10 million. I don't know the exact number, but it seems to be around $10 million. So he's a heavy hitter. He's a big property investor, and he still rent vests. He still understands that it's going to cost him less to rent out a really nice property in a prestigious suburb than to buy one and pay the mortgage down on it. So it's not just a strategy for someone trying to get into the market and trying to weigh up the cost benefits about buying or not buying. It's still a strategy that you could implement throughout your whole investing journey.
Agreed, mate. Absolutely agreed.
So, Joey, debt, I've had a car loan. That's been a pain to pay off. I've had a personal loan. That's been hard to pay off. I'm scared to pay off my credit card. I just hate being in debt. I'm sick of being in debt. I've paid all my stuff out, and, I'm finally starting to save some money. Do I really want to get into $400,000 worth of debt?
Yeah, well, firstly, it's really important to identify the different types of debt. So you've touched on what a lot of people refer to as bad debt or unproductive debt, whereas a mortgage, provided you've purchased the right asset, is what some people refer to as good debt or positive or productive debt. So a lot of the other debt you've touched on, say car debts and personal loans, is particularly talking about a car debt. It's debt for a depreciating asset. It's something that goes down in value as soon as you leave the showroom. Where taking out this kind of debt, you're taking out debt on an asset that's going to rise in value over time. It's an appreciating asset, and therefore well worth the outlay. Look, for mine, the conversation around debt, it's definitely one. It depends on what your risk appetite is. But firstly, it's for mine. I was in the same position as well, but it was about ripping off that Band-Aid. Once I made that initial decision, that once the first Band-Aid was ripped off, mate, my relationship with fear and debt, it's completely different to where it was 6 or so years ago. So really understanding what we're taking out that debt for, and in this case, it's to buy a valuable asset that's going to appreciate over time. And not only that, coupling with that debt position, it's also about the leverage that we're taking full advantage of. So yes, we don't have the full $500,000 to purchase a property, so we're taking out a $400,000 loan, or we're getting ourselves in that $400,000 debt. But we're essentially using other people's money to control a much larger asset that we just wouldn't be able to do on our own.
Yeah, spot on. I think you've covered most of the ground there. And just to push further on the good debt versus bad debt sort of scenario, the bad debt is generally purchasing goods and services that either completely devalue over time or devalue slowly over time. So if you go and buy, a $40,000 car straight out of the dealership, as soon as you drive it out, it's decreased in value almost 15%. And then, it's said that the value of the car depreciates by 10% every year after that. So, after 5 years, it's worth half of what you bought it for, or even less. And so when we talk about good debt and buying an investment property that has historically increased in value over time, you're leveraging your money, as Joey says. You're not just buying a $50,000 property. You're using $50,000 to get into a $500,000 property, and leveraging that money to increase the return of the value that you're putting in. So cash on cash figures, or money on money, as they say, you're getting a better return from your leveraged investment. And you just got to be comfortable with getting into that sort of debt. And obviously there's risks with getting into any sort of debt and being in any sort of scenario, but you've just got to be aware of those risks and understand and realize what the debt's actually doing for you. So Joey, I'm a little bit scared about my outgoings. I'm really scared about my mortgage repayment. I don't really know much about interest only and principal and interest, or variable versus fixed. And my rent's just really simple. It's just a sum of money that I've got to pay my landlord every month. But what are some of the things that I can do to potentially reduce those mortgage outgoings?
So a really common way of reducing the mortgage outgoing is by taking out what's known as a IO, or interest only loan, rather than a P&I, which is principal and interest. So in using the first model there, the interest only model, we're not paying any of the actual debt off. We are just paying the interest, and therefore the repayments naturally are going to be lower. It's not going to be, if your mortgage on a P&I loan was $1,600 a month, it's not going to be $400 a month, but it might be $1,300, or it might be $1,400. So you are going to have a small saving there, but simply because you're not paying any of the principal off. Now, people would ask the question, well, if I'm not paying any of the principal off, what am I doing? Why am I just recycling this debt? And it's really important that if we are taking that interest only option, to make sure that, again, we've spoken to that broker, and that broker can get you an offset account that's linked to your mortgage. Therefore, the money that you earn, you want to bank up and stockpile sitting in this offset account, so that that money is offset against the loan. Let's say your loan is $500,000 and you've been managed to get into a position where you've saved $100,000 in cash sitting in that offset account. Then the interest that you're charged is actually on $400,000 rather than the initial $500,000 balance that you actually have. So they take your $500,000 minus what you've got in the offset, and then you're only charged the interest on the balance. So it's a way of, I suppose, paying down the principal without actually paying down the principal. And you can just stockpile that money that is liquid. You can use it for your day-to-day expenses, or you could essentially use it to bulk pay off some of the principal down the track as well. So a really smart and wise way of being able to ensure that you can keep your repayments low. As a side note, really important for mine personally, and what I advise clients of mine to do, is to run your cash flows based off a principal and interest loan, because that's going to be the higher amount. So always make sure that, can I afford this property? Run your sums based off the principal and interest amount, and then add some. So to give yourself a bit of a rainy day buffer, let's say we enter a period like we see ourselves in the coronavirus period now, and you were on that principal interest loan, you could flick over to that interest only loan and reduce your repayments if you found yourself in any kind of financial hardship.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much covered off everything there, Joey. I think just being mindful of the people that might be a little boggled with all the terms that we've been throwing out. We're just trying to simplify it as much as possible. If you think about the two names, interest only really means that you're only paying the interest amount on the debt that you've borrowed. So you're not paying any of the actual debt down. You're only just paying the interest that's being charged from the bank. And then if you think about a principal and interest, you're paying that interest proportion, and you're paying down that principal proportion. So you're actually paying off that debt over time. Not sure if that was totally clear, but just being mindful of all the people that are a bit baffled at the moment.
Yeah, I probably over confused that for some people.
No, I just trying to help out. So, Joey, if I was to go down that interest only route where I'm only paying the interest and I'm not paying any of my debt off, well, I'll never be able to pay off my house. Like, I'll always be in debt.
Yeah, well, as I've touched on there, where I probably confused the listeners, it's really important that we do get that offset account. So that's going to be our kitty that's going to be building, and that's going to be offset against that interest. And going back to that example, the money that is owed, the principal that is owed, less the money that is in that offset account is what you're actually going to be charged. So not only are we reducing our interest repayments, but we're also building up that kitty that we can use to make a bulk payment off the principal. So we could reduce the loan by however much we have in the offset if we wish to. But not only that, and the main reason why we're getting into property is to see the capital growth over time. So let's say we bought that property at 500 grand and you stayed on interest only forever, but that property in 15 years time is worth $1.2 million. Well, then it just makes absolute sense. Even if you've still got that $500,000 debt, it's worth an additional $700,000. And that's why you buy that property. So it doesn't matter if you haven't paid off that debt, because the value has gone up drastically.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to that, initial leverage that we were just talking about. You're using, a sum as a deposit to leverage into a bigger asset that's going to get you into some debt, and you're not going to pay any of that debt. And that's very fearful. I mean, that's how I used to think really early on. And I was kind of like, oh, what if the property value does go down? And it does happen. Property values do stagnate. And there's been some horror stories of off the plan apartments that have been oversold, and now there's too much supply and everyone's trying to get rid of them, and the people are selling at a discount. So I think, we will be very clear, and that's why we sort of say, go to someone who's a professional as a buyer's agent or something like that to get an understanding of what a good investment property is. But, property values do go down, and you got to be very aware of that. But when we are talking about, A-grade investment properties that you would get advised to by going to a buyer's agent or a property investment advisor is, these things do increase over time. As Joey says, the capital growth should increase over time to a point where, if we're talking a 60-year period, the $500,000 debt or $400,000 debt isn't really going to seem much in terms of the total value of property. I mean, compound growth over time is the eighth wonder of the world, as they say, So it's just about understanding all these things and inflation and understanding that the cost of things increase over time. Have you ever heard, your grandfather used to say, oh, I used to buy fish and chips down at the shops for 5 cents and now they're $10. Like, how ridiculous. Well, that is inflation. That is the price of things increasing over time. And it happens to every sort of good or service asset class. Things increase over time. That's just inflation. And so as long as you understand all of those things, and that, not paying off your mortgage, although that's, what we've been brought up to sort of tell. I mean, that's growing up, that's all I was, told. You pay off your mortgage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Own your house outright. If we're holding on to these things for 10s, 20s, 30 years, the value is going to increase to a point where the debt's not even going to see amountable. You're going to have a 50% LVR, and that's probably something we'll get into in episode 2 of LVR. But you're going to have a significant value in the property than just the amount that's outstanding to the loan. And Joey, the last question is: after all of these discussions, my partner is pregnant. Does that really matter?
Firstly, depends on when you got your pre-approval and whether you've bought or whether you haven't bought. But in short, yes, it does matter for a couple of reasons. So firstly, if you haven't yet bought that property and you're still going through the approval processes and your mortgage broker is still requiring some documents about pay slips and whatnot, and your partner is no longer working, then yeah, your serviceability is absolutely going to be hit, because you're going to go down from 2 incomes to 1. Unless obviously your partner's still working through that pregnancy period. And if you have already indeed bought, then it's something that you do need to factor in, that you've gone down from 2 incomes to 1. So your serviceability of that loan is going to go down as well. So it's kind of twofold. If you haven't bought yet, then your borrowing power may be reduced. And if you have already bought, then it's something that you do need to be really mindful of, that you're not going to have that secondary income to help offset some of the loans, the repayments, the outgoings of that particular property.
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, this takes us all back to that first statement that Joey made about identifying what your goals are. Like, you really got to understand and look ahead and understand all these things that could potentially happen in your life. And even if, your partner isn't pregnant at the moment, she could get pregnant, in the short term, in the next 6 months. And so you have to sort of understand that these, big life events do occur and things do happen, and sort of prepare and plan out your property journey for these things. I mean, I've had a couple of friends that have, bought an off the plan apartment, and between the time they've purchased it and moved in, it's been 3 or 4 years. And within 3 or 4 years, so many things can change. They've gotten married, they've got a kid on the way, and, they bought a 2-bedroom apartment, and now they really need a 3-bedroom because, the one of the partners works from home, and they need a home office, and they need a baby's room. And so, things in life do change. And although we can't, always predict and forecast these things, it's always good when you're sort of identifying your goals initially to sort of think about things that could change and sort of address them before you make that big final step. And I think, really planning that out from the get-go is super critical.
And you're dead right in saying that it's very important to make sure that you've thought well ahead of the now and making sure that the purchase suits you today, but also tomorrow. But at the same breath, if that very first purchase has been one well calculated, you've received the right education, the right knowledge, the right wisdom, the right guidance, you've gone to a professional, then that property that you've purchased, provided we're not talking about you bought it today and you want to try and sell it tomorrow. If we're talking a 3 to 5 to 6 year horizon, you're probably going to see some growth there anyway. And if you're practicing all the methods that we've just spoken about, then building up that offset account, you're probably going to be in a position where you could potentially sell off that property, realize a little bit of a gain, and then potentially upsize into another phenomenal asset. So it's not the end of the world, but if you make that first purchase a wrong one, then you might see yourself in a little bit of a world of hurt if you do need to find yourself in that position where you do need to do an upgrade or an upsize. So it is, and we've touched on it 1,000 times this podcast, it is absolutely critical to make sure that first purchase is on point. It will set you up in the long run.
Yeah, spot on. And I love that you clarified that. It's not the end of the world if you get it right. We've all made mistakes, but I think, the basis of Joey and I making these podcasts is, to learn from the mistakes that we've made, learn from the mistakes that, our friends and other investors that we talk to have made, and sort of help you avoid making those mistakes so that you can get ahead. I mean, there'd be nothing worse than, buying an off the plan apartment, realize that there's an oversupply of them, and the property value's gone down by 50 grand, and you're now in a position where you need to upgrade, and so you've got to sell the property in a low point. And another thing that we've been banging on this whole time is it's a if you're looking for an investment, it's a long sit and hold process. And so if you're thinking about it just in the short term, you don't want to have to irrationally sell the property. It's said that buying and selling property in Australia is really expensive. It's like 5% to buy the property and 3% of the sale price to sell the property. So to transact these things is costly. And as Joey's saying, it's not the end of the world. You can see a gain and move on from there and cut your losses. But if you can avoid them from the get-go, then we're just trying to help you get through that process. Absolutely. And so I think, this sort of sums up the 16 questions. This podcast has been a kind of I'm not really sure if I should get into the market. What are the common questions that do come up? What are the ifs and outs, the should I, shouldn't I sort of thing? And the next episode that we'll be doing is going to be kind of I'm about to buy, or I'm definitely thinking about buying. What do I need to do? And so, Joey and I will definitely put some questions together. We've already got some brainstorming happening in the background. But if you guys have got any questions, definitely send them through. We'd love to cover them off for you. It doesn't have to be about, being in that exact position of I'm about to buy, what do I need to know? If you've got any other sort of first home questions, we're definitely going to do a big listener Q&A question scenario as well. So if that's something you guys would be interested in asking us, or have any questions whatsoever, just flick them through to either hi@jordandeong.com or joey@estroproperty.com. Is it .au or .com, Joey?
Just .com.
Just .com. I got it right. All right, Joey. Well, thanks again, mate. You've always got some fantastic insights. I always love listening to your podcast, and I think this is that's what really sparked this sort of Q&A and questions and first home buyer sort of analysis. So, mate, I really appreciate always catching up with you. You're always a fantastic bloke to have a conversation with, and I'm really excited for the next one.
Yeah, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait. Catch you next episode.
How good is Joey? I always love catching up with him and getting to delve into the insights from someone who has already amassed a large portfolio of his own. If you want to go back and hear his story, he shares it with us in episode 12. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have one or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey. Learn from the mistakes that we have made and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing a story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan de Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.